Hello and welcome back to the British Accent Podcast. I'm your host, Robert, and I'm really happy you're here with me again. If you're new to the podcast, this is the place where we explore fascinating topics using simple English to help you learn, enjoy, and improve your skills naturally. Every episode, we take one main idea and break it down into fun and interesting parts. We also talk about movies, share an inspiring quote, and learn something cool from the world of science. Today, our topic is something we all experience every single day. But we often forget how powerful it really is. We're talking about fashion. Not just the clothes we wear, but how fashion has shaped societies, cultures, and even revolutions. From ancient kings in golden robes to today's digital fashion trends. Fashion has always been part of human life. So, in this episode, we'll travel through time together and explore how clothing changed across history, why it matters, and where fashion might be heading in the future. Sounds good? Then let's begin our journey through style, fabric, color, and creativity. Let's dive into fashion through the ages. Fashion is more than just what we wear. It's a way of speaking without using words. Every outfit, every color, every material tells a story. Sometimes, it tells people where we come from. Sometimes, it shows how we feel. And sometimes, it simply says, "This is who I am." For thousands of years, humans have used clothing to express power, beauty, or status. A fur coat in one time meant survival. A silk dress in another meant royalty. And a ripped pair of jeans? That could be a statement of freedom or rebellion. But fashion isn't only about the past, it also reflects the future, where we're going, what we believe in, and how we adapt to new ideas. Even today, what we wear can show our mood, our culture, or our connection to the world. So, why study fashion history? Because it helps us understand people. Their values, their art, their creativity, and even their politics. When we look at clothes from different times, we also see how society changed. From gender roles to technology, from war to peace, fashion has followed us through every chapter of human life. In this episode, we'll look at how fashion changed in different periods. We'll start with the earliest styles in ancient history. Then, we'll walk through time, from kings and queens to jeans and t-shirts. And in the end, we'll take a peek into the future of fashion. So let's begin with the very first fashionable humans. Let's go way back, thousands of years into the past. Long before fashion shows and shopping malls, people were already dressing with style and purpose. In ancient Egypt, clothing wasn't just about covering the body. It was about power, status, and religion. Pharaohs wore linen robes, light, white, and perfect for the hot desert. They decorated their outfits with gold, jewelry, and symbols of the gods. Even the colors had meaning. White meant purity. Gold was for the sun god. And blue showed a connection to the heavens. In Mesopotamia, men and women often wore long skirts or robes made from wool. The more layers you had, the richer you looked. And yes, even back then, people cared about looking good. Let's not forget the Greeks and Romans. In Greece, clothing was simple and elegant. People wore long, draped cloths called chitons, tied at the shoulder. But what made Greek fashion special was the shape and flow. It looked almost like art. Romans, on the other hand, had the famous toga. Only Roman citizens could wear it. So, it was a sign of honor and power. They also loved sandals, belts, and jewelry. Fashion was already a way to say, "I belong to this group," or "I have this level of importance." And women? They had their own versions, like the stola, a long dress worn over a tunic. They often styled their hair in complex ways and used natural makeup. So, even 2,000 years ago, the idea of personal style was already strong. From fabrics and colors to accessories and meaning, ancient people used clothes to show identity. Just like we do today. Now, let's step into the world of castles, knights, and kings. The Middle Ages, also known as the medieval period, lasted from about the 5th to the 15th century. And fashion during this time? It said everything about your place in society. If you were a peasant, your clothes were simple, usually made of wool or rough linen. They wore tunics, long skirts, aprons, and cloaks. Why? Because life was hard, and they needed clothes that were practical and durable. But if you were noble or royal, things were very different. Rich fabrics like silk and velvet showed wealth and power. People wore layers and layers of clothing, sometimes just to show how many fine materials they could afford. Bright colors, fur, embroidery, and long flowing sleeves were all signs of nobility. In fact, some clothes were so long, they dragged on the ground like a train. And yes, this was on purpose. It meant you had servants to help you walk. There were even sumptuary laws, in some places, rules about who could wear what. Only royals could wear purple, for example, because purple dye was rare and expensive. Women wore dresses with tight bodices and long skirts. Headwear was also very important, like veils, coifs, and even the famous cone-shaped henning, the pointy hat with the long cloth. Men wore tunics, cloaks, and hose. Later in the period, men's fashion started to become more fitted and detailed. Fashion was still about status, but it also began to show off craftsmanship and regional style. So, in the Middle Ages, what you wore wasn't just about staying warm. It was about showing your place in society, your family's wealth, and even your country or region. Fashion had become a full expression of identity, and that idea would only grow stronger. The Renaissance was a time of art, discovery, and rebirth. It began in Italy around the 14th century and spread across Europe over the next few hundred years. And fashion? It flourished like never before. People became more interested in beauty, detail, and self-expression. And clothing became a true form of art. For the wealthy, fashion was dramatic, rich, and full of detail. Men wore doublets, tight-fitting jackets, along with hose and padded shoulders to create a bold silhouette. They also wore short cloaks and wide-brimmed hats with feathers. Women's fashion was even more elaborate. They wore corsets to shape their bodies, gowns with full skirts, and sleeves that could be removed and changed depending on the occasion. This gave them flexibility and also showed off how many pieces they owned. Colors were deep and luxurious: reds, golds, dark greens, and blues. Many clothes were embroidered with gold thread or decorated with pearls and jewels. The fabrics? Velvet, brocade, and satin were the most popular. In fact, the richer your clothes looked, the higher your status appeared. One interesting trend from this period: people often wore clothing with slashes, small cuts in the fabric that let a different color show through from underneath. It was like wearing two outfits at once, and it was very stylish. Fashion also started to reflect regional differences more strongly. You could often tell where someone came from by their style of dress. And one more thing, portraits became popular in the Renaissance. So people dressed to impress, not just in person, but for the canvas. The Renaissance was all about individuality, creativity, and beauty, and fashion was a big part of expressing that. The 18th century was a time of elegance and extravagance, especially in Europe. Let's start in France, where fashion was truly royal. The court of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette set the tone. Women wore huge dresses with wide skirts, supported by structures called panniers. They also wore tight corsets, lace, ribbons, and layers of fabric. Wigs were tall, powdered, and sometimes decorated with tiny ships or gardens. It may sound strange today, but back then, the bigger your hair, the more fashionable you were. Men also dressed to impress. They wore breeches, stockings, waistcoats, and embellished coats with embroidery. Bright colors and rich fabrics like silk and velvet were signs of wealth. But then came the French Revolution. And fashion changed. People started to dress more simply, especially in the 19th century. In the early 1800s, women wore empire waist dresses. Those were long and flowy with a high waist just under the bust. They were inspired by ancient Greek and Roman styles. Men began wearing trousers instead of breeches, and coats became more practical and tailored. This era also saw the rise of Victorian fashion in the mid to late 1800s. Women's dresses became structured again, with crinolines and bustles to shape the back of the skirt. There were strict rules about what to wear and when. Different clothes for the morning, afternoon, evening, and morning. And let's not forget the invention of the sewing machine. It made clothes cheaper and easier to produce, so more people could follow fashion trends. Fashion in these centuries was all about status, rules, and evolution. From giant wigs to slim silhouettes, fashion reflected the changing world. The 20th century brought the biggest changes fashion had ever seen. And it all started with freedom. In the 1920s, women's fashion took a bold turn. The puff-flapper style became popular, short dresses, bobbed hair, and a carefree attitude. It was the first time women started dressing for comfort and independence. In the 1930s and 40s, fashion responded to world events. During World War II, clothes became more practical. Fabrics were limited, so styles became simpler. Women wore trousers for work, a big shift from earlier times. In the 1950s, fashion turned glamorous again. This was the era of Hollywood stars like Marilyn Monroe. Full skirts, narrow waists, and bright colors defined the look. Then came the 1960s and 70s, a time of bold expression. Miniskirts, tie-dye shirts, bell-bottoms, and hippie styles showed up everywhere. Fashion was about individuality and breaking the rules. The 1980s brought big shoulder pads, flashy colors, and designer labels. Power dressing was in, especially for women in business. In the 1990s, things became more casual. Think jeans, t-shirts, and the rise of grunge. People cared less about perfection and more about being real. And the 2000s? They were all about mixing styles. Vintage met modern, luxury met streetwear, and fashion moved faster than ever. Now, in the 2020s, fashion is global and digital. People find inspiration from social media, influencers, and even AI. There's also more focus on sustainability. Recycled fabrics, slow fashion, and eco-conscious brands are becoming important. Fashion today isn't just about looking good. It's about making a statement about who you are, what you believe, and how you want to be seen. From ancient Egypt to Instagram, fashion has always reflected the human story.
Cinema Talks?
This week in Cinema Talks, I want to share a film that beautifully reflects the theme of fashion and identity. It's called Phantom Thread, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Set in 1950s London, the story follows a brilliant but obsessive fashion designer named Reynolds Woodcock, played by Daniel Day-Lewis. Reynolds creates dresses for royalty and high society, but his world is tightly controlled. Everything must be perfect, his routines, his silence during breakfast, and of course, his designs. Then, he meets Alma, a young woman who becomes his muse and model. But Alma is not passive, she challenges him, disrupts his patterns, and forces him to confront emotions he's always avoided. It's not a romantic comedy, or even a typical love story. It's deep, complex, and explores the power dynamics between artist and muse, and how love can sometimes turn strange or even toxic. What makes Phantom Thread special isn't just the story, it's the details. The costumes are stunning. You feel like you're inside a real 1950s fashion house. The film shows how much effort goes into making one perfect dress. You see the quiet moments, the hand-stitching, the dedication, and the music, composed by Johnny Greenwood, adds to the beauty and tension. This is a slow film, but in a good way. It lets you soak in the atmosphere and think about the characters long after it's over. If you're interested in fashion, creativity, or just love beautifully made movies, I really recommend watching Phantom Thread.
Words of wisdom.
Today's quote is from the famous designer Coco Chanel. She once said, "Fashion fades, only style remains the same." Let's take a moment to think about that. Fashion is what's popular right now, what people are wearing this season or this year. But style is something deeper. It's the way you express yourself, your personality, your confidence. Trends come and go. One year everyone wears oversized jackets, the next year it's all about minimalism. But true style lasts forever. It's not about copying what others wear. It's about knowing who you are and showing that through your clothes. Even if fashion changes, your personal style is something that stays with you. So next time you get dressed, ask yourself, not just is this trendy, but also does this feel like me? Because that's what Coco Chanel meant, the best fashion is the one that fits your identity.
Curious Minds. The Science Corner.
This week in Curious Minds, let's look at something fun and practical. Why do clothes keep us warm? It might seem obvious, because they cover our bodies. But there's a bit more science behind it. When your body produces heat, that warmth tries to escape into the air. If you're not wearing anything, the heat leaves quickly, especially in cold weather. But when you wear clothes, especially layers, they trap the warm air close to your body. This trapped air acts like insulation, like a warm blanket of invisible heat. Some materials are better at doing this than others. For example, wool has tiny pockets that hold warm air, so it's great in winter. Cotton feels nice, but it doesn't keep heat very well when it's wet. That's why hikers prefer synthetic fabrics that stay warm even if it rains. Also, did you know that wearing layers is smarter than just one thick coat? That's because layers trap more air between them, and more air means more warmth. So, the next time you're putting on your winter outfit, remember, you're not just dressing up, you're building a tiny heat shield using science. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the British Accent Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our journey through fashion through the ages, from ancient robes to modern trends, and everything in between. If you found it interesting, educational, or just fun to listen to, don't forget to follow us, leave a rating, or share the podcast with your friends. We always love to hear from you, so feel free to send us your thoughts and questions for future episodes. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and always speak with confidence. This is Robert, signing off from the British Accent Podcast. Take care, and see you in the next episode.